Hi, I'm Jesse Trucks. I'm the Minister of Magic here at Splunk, and I'm a security advisor and a security specialist working with our public sector partners.
And good afternoon. I'm Brian Olson. I'm the professional services engineer here at Corelight, former analyst and architect in the DoD world for past 10 years.
So Splunk Phantom helps to reduce the amount of repetitive work that can, introduce a lot of errors into the work. And it also, one of the things that happens is the volume of alerts that come in and the volume of just events themselves are so high that even in a small operation with a large, relatively large staff, you just can't touch it. All of the things that need to be analyzed and evaluated. And so Splunk Phantom, as a security orchestration, automation, and response SOAR platform, allows even a small or relatively small group do a great deal of work without having to have alert fatigue and, kind of burn out and that whole staff turnover thing. Instead, it makes people's job more interesting, makes the humans more effective, and it makes the return on the investment for security infrastructure much better for any organization. So SOAR, historically, SOAR has been difficult to implement because you have to, well, first of all, you have to understand your robust processes really, really, really well. You have to have pretty well documented just procedures in your security operations center. And then you have to figure out what does the human do? And you have to do that by watching what the human does repetitively. And you have to have tools in your environment that you can then interact with. And a lot of tools are easy to figure out how to interact with by human, but it's more difficult to figure out how to automate those interactions. But now with modern tools with APIs, it's a much easier to do today. But organizations who are using these tools haven't caught up to how to interact with them on an API basis or to write their own automation, for instance.
Yeah, and I think that one of the benefits that Splunk obviously brings to the table is being able to manage the large amounts of data that are coming through. As previously beforehand, with SOCs now wanting to analyze every bit of information crossing the wire. Splunk does an excellent role, managing the kind of data lake or all of that information in the spot, and then having their SOAR technology Phantom on top of that, being able to kind of query that data lake. Just provides that quick insight into all of those events that are being ingested by the SIEM environment.
So the way Splunk Phantom implements SOAR, it allows for taking whatever those processes in a SOC are and codifying that directly into what the system does. You can build it exactly how this chain of events a human would do. You get an IP and you go look it up here and you go look it up there and you look it up there, and then you do these things to it and you block it or you don't. But then it also allows to iterate on that, and you can go through and say, hey, we can do these three things in parallel. A human has to do them in serial, but we can do them in parallel. Now we just shorten the time even more, down to milliseconds rather than seconds or minutes. And then you can chain playbooks so that you can have an operation that makes sense to do this other operation, and you can call that and then have it feed back in. And the way that it can analyze and manipulate data allows you to pre-process and post-process anything you want in any series. As a result, what normally would be a human doing some sort of a process or using a tool to look at a dashboard or table of data results, they would then have to figure out what they need to learn from it even further, and then take that and then put it into some other tool. Whereas Splunk Phantom allows you to both show that to the human and send that to the next process, so that then the human can see all in one pane of glass all the various things they need from the disparate tools all at once. So you can augment and iterate and improve over your original non-automated processes.
Yeah, and one benefit I think that Corelight plays in that role is that we're obviously telling, the story of what happened on the network, right? So that type of information being, put in front of the analysts where they're going to be able to make those, I guess, queries, faster, have that information, in front of them faster, and then automate some of those processes to, create those tickets, in real time, just to verify, I feel like it's going to be huge.
So that often happens when any kind of spike in traffic occurs, whether it's a special event, there's higher news that day, whatever the reason that might be, it might be quarterly processing, then you're going to get more false positives in most environments. And so the other thing that happens is anytime that there is a new thing implemented that has not been tuned, no matter what the environment is, you're going to have a higher number of alerts because you have more data that is being analyzed in different ways. And also when you have a new person, when a new person is coming on and being onboarded, right, that person is going to suffer through trying to figure out how to look at these tons of different alerts and trying to look at the documentation like, okay, so I have this thing and I'm supposed to go and do this process, right? All of those situations happen. And so especially when it comes to bringing on new people and when the new projects are brought on, then you see an increase in stress and a increase in probability that someone will start thinking about, whether or not a process is functional and maybe taking shortcuts. And, just because we're human and say, oh, we have 57 alerts, I've only got 8 hours and it's not going to work. How do I triage that, right? And so that's the problem is humans are asked to triage things that computers should be triaging.
Yeah, Jesse, I think you hit it right on the head. I'm not sure how long it's been since you've been in a SOC environment. I worked in a SOC environment, but alert fatigue is a thing.
Yeah.
There's countless times. Again, we touched kind of on the big data implementations that are big right now. Having those abundance of events that are out there and all that information is definitely a lot to look at for an analyst, especially a new analyst. And when they're coming in, trying to kind of take a look at exactly what's going on in the network and kind of, create that ticket and then, do the research on the events that are coming in. A lot of those, if you're not too sure, obviously, of, the network information, the layout and what's going on in the network, but also, what the alerts actual meaning is, you do end up with false positives. And, as an analyst that's, been in that position before, when you have your dashboard set in front of you and have already done your, your hour or whatever it is, lookups and queries, just to track down and see what's going on with a certain event. When you see that stuff kind of pop in again, it's you kind of brush it aside, right? But then again, you're missing those important events that are coming through, which is if those have already been clearly defined within the SOAR playbook, obviously it's going to help those analysts and also kind of filter out and go into that mindset where if there's garbage in, garbage out, right? So with the data that's coming in, obviously you want the analyst to look at events that are meaningful and are actionable to what they need. Corelight is kind of the full story of what's going on your network, with the added insight of obviously the protocol analysis of the traffic itself. And being able to present that data to an analyst or feed that into Splunk, and then having Phantom sit on top of Splunk, where they can turn those actionable events or those stories into actionable events. I feel like is going to be a game changer for a lot of the SOCs that are out there. Zeek provides that information and it provides those insights to help to kind of support those events, but also kind of as a standalone alerting mechanism on its own, right? So with some of the inferences that we provide, again, we talk a lot about the north south, but even with the east west traffic between different zones, if someone is scanning your network shares, or if someone is actually typing on a keyboard in SSH session that they might not supposed to be hitting from one zone to another, that some of that stuff might not be in a firewall because that traffic is going to be legitimate. But then again, some of the alerts, that Suricata provides, and then the inferences that Corelight Zeek provides, you'll be able to get those that information to see it, and just help you verify that that traffic is, is it legitimate, or is it actually something, what they call nefarious going on your network that's, not supposed to be occurring. Um, Jesse, but with the playbooks that you've seen kind of come out, so far, what have you seen in the SOC environment related to that?
So a couple of things come to mind is, and certainly today, the ability to quickly adapt to changing things in the environment is something that playbooks really make a huge difference in. And I look back, and especially today compared to the past, um, many years ago, when I was working at like Department of Energy, or before that in a couple different telco environments, for instance, the network topology can sometimes completely change out from under us in a certain environment, and we just get the data and we still have the same kinds of alerts, but the context is missing now because of what my knowledge that I've gained about the environment. And so what happens is without something like Corelight, I don't have the ability to make sense of what is a traffic pattern that makes, where, I can now have the system analyze something and tell me a story that I can understand, no matter what's happening, in terms of changes or new things in the environment. It would have been a complete game changer. Honestly, probably would have saved me days worth of time. And so what I see customers doing now is, um, when they have playbooks implemented to do these things, they're saving hours in mean time to resolution for quite a number of things. And sometimes it's can save you a few minutes here, a few minutes there, and then it adds up to a lot of time when you're knocking out false positives. But when you have something that's real and really actionable for an investigation, you can easily save hours.
With the data that Corelight is providing, and then the added benefits of having the SOAR and the playbooks built on top of it, doing those lookups and those added insights to provide, even a more additional value to the events that are coming through, and just automating that process, looking up a domain or checking a firewall log to see if it's blocked, if the traffic made it through, rather than as an analyst, you used to have to go out and reach out to another team, to check those firewall logs or verify that stuff is, actually blocked on the network. And then, with, being able to look that up or have it done automatically for you in the playbook is definitely a big, huge time saver.
Yeah, one of the things that I see in this is, the research shows about the way humans think and process information, that task switching costs us several minutes, upwards of 20 minutes, depending on how much of a deep context switch it is. So if I have to copy that out and go to a completely different tool and analyze a totally different way of looking at information and kind of digest that myself, then pivot back to my investigation, that's going to cost me a lot of time, and it's going to slow down my ability to, just in my own brain, the way it operates, it'll slow down my ability to respond in a reasonable way and to make decisions, actionable decisions. Whereas if I can have that automated, now I've got a single interface where I can have the Corelight data coming in that then triggers something that pulls all the reputation and IP and DNS stuff. And now I can look at the conversation of what's happening, in a, bad actor, for instance, or potentially, all in one pane inside of Splunk Phantom, and it makes a huge difference in my ability as an analyst to respond to something and make decisions on any kind of incident.
So I think the addition of Suricata is huge for Corelight, simply because it kind of gives us that, question answer that we didn't have before, right? So we know things, could potentially be happening or are happening. We can create that signature, and we're going to get, obviously, a response and our alert that triggers off of that. Having that additional information into the insights that the Corelight data provides, and those inferences that we have with the protocol analysis, telling the story of what's going on, just, further deepens the amount of information, and then also being able to kind of make sure that you're hitting on those true positives with the events that, Zeek and Suricata are, giving the analyst together.
Yeah, and one of the things I see as an additional power is that because you can have all that information coming in together, and to have it easily accessible is you can do more advanced analysis using Splunk in analytics as well as Splunk Phantom in terms of responding. Because if there's an event that's triggered from something that's not directly from Corelight, the enterprise security or another tool, then it can pull enriched data from both Corelight, Zeek, and Suricata at the same time, and you have one query to do instead of 2 or 3 or 4, and you're going out to multiple tools. Of course, the number of tools that you reduce in your environment, that doesn't help just in terms of administration, but also in processing your response and how you automate things. And it reduces the number of different tools that your analysts have to learn and understand, especially if you're using a lot of automation with Splunk Phantom. Then you don't necessarily have to go and learn another tool. You just add it to the playbooks, and then your first line analyst can just digest the information and respond to it.
The added benefit that Corelight logs bring to the table is that we're not just giving you the Q&A response that like a firewall log will give you, or that a standard IDS IPS log will give you, where it's actionable based on something that has already occurred, right? You're already looking for something. I'm asking the question, has this happened on my network? Let me know if it does. We do bring that to the table with Suricata. But the added benefit of having Zeek on there is being able to tell that entire story of what's happening with that connection from start to finish. It's something that the other tools, with the firewall logs, etc., that they don't provide. And that's why Zeek has been so powerful in the security community, is because we're kind of giving you that end-to-end story of what's going on with the connection. How does it initiate? Where does it lead to? Again, with the advanced analytics from a security standpoint, to provide additional, analysis on the protocols that are used in that connection.
I think that that's a great point, because one of the big differences is you have the point in time data, firewall logs. You can count how many times something's been blocked or denied and those kinds of things. But what you don't get is that conversation. What is that series of transactions? You get the packets. You can say, this HTTP connection happened. You can look at a series of events over time. What is that back and forth like? And I think the way you said it is great. Like that back and forth conversation of what is the real stream of information. If you only hear when somebody's on the phone and you only hear one half of it, you don't actually understand what's happening. You have a bunch of data points. But if you hear both sides of the conversation, the client and server, now you have an understanding of exactly what's happened, and you have much more actionable intel to work from.
With the size of networks, and obviously getting bigger, obviously with your north-south traffic, most networks obviously deploy a sensor in that mine where, it's your inbound, outbound to internet-based. With some of the different communication that we have, east-west with, between different network zones, DMZs, etc., and analyzing those protocols and that type of traffic to provide inferences into exactly what's going on in that. SSH connections, moving around, who's talking to who, how long have they been open for, and just providing that added insight to that east-west communication, obviously for that lateral movement is huge.
And I see one of the things that I like about those deployment models being available is because when you bring in endpoint data, especially, right, you bring in endpoint data, plus you get some of those, network things that you get out of Zeek, Bro, and Corelight, is you can coordinate that information within Splunk and analyze that, and then act on or pull data from those things. So, for example, on the network, you see, a HTTP transaction happening, and you get that information, you get that conversation in context, and you get any sort of signature alerts that may be there in Suricata and Corelight and Zeek. But then you can pull the data off the endpoint using Sysmon and other say Windows tools or even Linux box tools. Now you have the context of inside the processes happening inside and how those correlate to that network traffic that's happening that you see in Corelight, and that gives you your incredibly rich analytics that you can do on an enterprise scale. So now when you see crosstalk, east and west, you also know what's happening inside of those points. Whereas if you do only endpoint detection, like quite a number of organizations do, you're missing an incredible amount of information that's very, very valuable, what those conversations really look like. And if you only do network and you don't also do endpoint, then you're missing what's happening inside the box. It's like a cloud, and in a document, and you don't know what's happening inside. The same thing with you can either put the cloud in the network, or you can put the fuzziness over the endpoint, or you can instrument both tools, with tools doing both, and then you get that, end to end, north, south, east, west, and inside of each of the device. And it's a great way to utilize the power of the integration of Splunk and Corelight, and using Zeek and Suricata. So that process is actually sort of age-old, way of doing things. Back in my sysadmin days, before I went to full-time security, I would do a great deal of automation. The whole, like, if you do it 5 times, write a shell script. If you do run that 5 times, write a Perl script. I just dated myself. But the process really is, somebody has to do something. They see something in alert in a SIM. They see some, data in, their tool, whatever that is, firewall, Corelight, what have you. And then they copy an IP and they go use this tool. You go to VirusTotal, or you go to your Palo Alto, you get your, OS, open source threat intelligence, things like that. And then you go and you correlate that, you get that information. Now you go pull this and you compare. And so what are all these things as humans doing? You write down all those tasks. That's your workflow, right? That's your process. So now you've got your run book, as we used to call them, for what you're supposed to do as a human. You take that run book and you turn that into a playbook. So if an organization already has pretty decent, if not super robust, but they've got pretty decent run books, a run book is basically a whiteboard, a diagram of a playbook. You take exactly what those steps are in the run book, you implement those in a playbook, and then you run it through Phantom instead of having an analyst look at it. So you take the exact same thing an analyst would start with, and you send it into Phantom. And so if today I'm looking at information that comes off the wire and I'm investigating something, and I'd go get some data out of Corelight, instead I can have it run a playbook, and now I have all that analysis pre-digested for me, where I can look at all of the information from those IPs in context, as well as what those conversations are with the Corelight data, and I can look at them together, just like I would have if I did it manually, but I've translated the exact same steps into a playbook.
In all the SOCs that I've visited, it's been difficult to kind of say, like, one way of doing it is not going to be, a gold standard for all the SOCs. Obviously, each one kind of has a different kind of operating procedure or SOP that they use in order to kind of triage events, the ways that they look things up, or the ways that they do things. Bringing the logs. Obviously, the different type of data sources that they have are going to play a role into how they kind of attack an incident, or look at alerts that are coming through. And the best way that I've found to do it is just kind of sit there and take kind of like a high level view of what your analysts are doing, or what you're asking them to do, and what you with certain events, or those just start with a low hanging fruit. They're going to be easy actionable tickets that you will create. And then start at that standpoint, and then work your way into more advanced analytics, or advanced automation, where you're potentially blocking something down the road. That it's going to be different for every SOC that's out there.
That's a good point. And one of the things I like about the way you're talking about it too is that you go back and you iterate. So you figure out what's a high level view of what an analyst does, and you look at what tools they're using and how they're effectively using them, and you automate something in relatively rudimentary form. And then you find that there's an analyst uses that playbook, and then they're still, say, going and pulling some more data from Suricata, or they're pulling some data off the firewall, doing queries. So you have them document what things are they doing, if they're doing them outside the tool, right? Or inside the tool, you can see in the documentation that it builds by, here's the actions that were manually performed. Go look at all the things that were manually performed. You can query those. You can figure out what those are. Now you can change those playbooks or build new playbooks to do subsets of things, right? Chain playbooks. And now you can iterate over time to refine this process, because I think that one of the things you said, Brian, that reminded me that when I was doing work, I might do this, not do the same thing, more than 4 times, 2 times. And every time I do something, I do it in a slightly different order. And then, the next person does something differently. So you're not sure how to automate all of it right away. So you start somewhere, and then you help educate the customer on how those tools operate more effectively for what they're doing. And then you can help them iterate over time. Like, hey, those things you're doing there, there's Corelight functions you can pull into Phantom automatically. So you pull data in. Oh, hey, that's something you can look up on your firewall and you can pull that data in. This is another Splunk query. Oh, now you can go back to Suricata at this stage. Hey, you can add some more things. And then as you iterate, you get more and more efficient, and it turns your tier 1, tier 2 analysts, or whatever term, the sort of, the and more entry level jobs into a position that helps to automate and improve things rather than just, clicking on tickets all day, which is like this paradigm that we always think of as, that first level analyst.
Yeah, it's almost like you're at least in my mind, the way I kind of relate it, it's like you're creating those, correlation events or dashboards that you would in Splunk. Obviously, you're kind of getting those pieces all together and then just kind of building your event flow, or your whiteboarding your workflow, rather than kind of, whiteboarding, security events or creating a signature or what have you. And I think, everything is always, at least to a certain extent, going to be a work in progress. So it's, a living workflow, I guess, might be the best way to describe it. You're always building on it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that helps there is if you have playbooks to start with, like for instance, there's community playbooks for phishing. And your point about Brian, about SOCs having something, the way they do things is different every time. Part of it is their collection of tools. Part of it is what is their risk that they're trying to mitigate, et cetera. And also how they've evolved over time. So you take that basic playbook that does some things that you would do in any kind of phishing exercise, and you can pull stuff out, you can add stuff, you can say, oh, my tool works differently, those kinds of things. And I think that part of what helps too is having really robust tools when you have a playbook that's already written by a vendor, for instance, right? I know that Corelight has playbooks already written. I can then, as a customer, start there, put it into Splunk Phantom, make sure I connect it to the right data sources that come in from Splunk and from the Corelight products. And now I can more quickly get something into production without having to necessarily learn the tool intimately and deeply right off the bat. I have a really quick time to value to get to production using both Splunk Phantom and Corelight.
Yeah. And again, one example that I think it just, kind of pops into mind that I think every SOC kind of deals with is, IDS alert hits. So you're flagging, and maybe you're flagging for a file that downloaded, right? Being able to kind of have that done, as the old process would be, I have the IDS alert. I see that file being downloaded. I go try and get the information from the firewall logs to see if that actually made it through. Then I'm taking that hash value, I'm going over to my darknet to do my open source research, or my blacknet to do that research on it. Then I'm going into another tool, Corelight, or some tool that Zeek. I'm sorry, Zeek, that'll tell the story of all right, what are the IPs that it hit beforehand, what IPs did it hit afterhand. Oh, it's the hash value. Was Zeek able to carve out that file? And then going to pick up that file, give it to the malware analyst to do your additional analysis on that. And just that manual process of looking everything up. Whereas, in the Splunk Phantom playbook, all that information is already there and will be presented to you for the analyst or your, senior analyst to kind of make it an actionable insight onto what's going on. Obviously, you don't want to blindly create tickets, but you can at least get to that process where it's, a yes and no question in the workflow, where it's, you have these information. I pulled these relevant logs to the event that occurred, scan through those logs. Does this looks like something that's actionable you want to create a ticket on? And, have the senior analyst click yes, within, seconds, or, at the very most minutes, just to kind of review it and make sure everything is there. If you had to pick certain tools, if you were on a deployment or you were going out to analyze a network, the one that's going to provide, obviously, the insight that's needed is Corelight. I mean, just the breadth of information that comes with it, I think is, is one of the most, if not the most beneficial tool that an analyst could look at for giving them an idea or telling them that story of what's on the network. The protocol analysis that Zeek provides just for the communications. We talk a lot about going north-south traffic, but east-west, and then of course you have your AWS and your cloud sensors and traffic that's obviously passing through there. I mean IoT as well, analyzing those protocols and being able to kind of tell that story and provide inferences, is huge, hugely beneficial to the analysts. So a lot of times now analysts, for some reason, they always kind of go straight to PCAP. I don't know why. So they have an alert in their IDS IPS, and next thing you know, they're chunking around, digging around, 10, how many megs of PCAP trying to find the event. With the way that Corelight works, you might, have an alert trigger in your IDS. It might be blocked, it might not, or you might find something in the Suricata alert. Now in the Zeek data, and the UIDs that has kind of been the cornerstone or the way that our events are built. You're able to trace those Suricata alerts now to the Zeek alerts that are following through. So you can provide, again, I'm going to mention again with the, the Q&A, the Suricata IDS alerts are giving you that answer that something occurred on your network. It's like, all right, well, now I kind of want to know the surrounding conversation that happened to that IDS event. Well, with the UID and the UID that Zeek implements in every event, you're able to, tie that information or tie that UID from the IDS alert, Suricata IDS alert, into the Zeek logs, where then you can provide, that additional information and, getting the kind of whole flow of data of what occurred on that, start with the con log and then build it, if it was a DNS, HTTP, a file alert, as a file downloaded, you're able to kind of bring all of that information together just based on that one UID that's provided inside the alert.
One of the things that I see quite often is too many tools, in a SOC, and there might be 3 or 4 things that have overlap, but not, this one tool does this part of thing, and then this other tool does some of the same thing, but its own other thing, and you end up with these tools where you have 17 tools doing the job of 13 tools, that could be 13 tools. And I find that if you simplify your environment, so you have powerful tools that are focused in a collection of things that all make sense together, then you get better data fidelity, and it's easier to build your automation, build your alerts around it, right? And so I like the way you're talking, Brian, about how you can have this conversation, this Q&A, and you can have one interface then to your network, basically your network traffic conversations, your Q&A. And so you can you bring that data into Splunk, and then you can query it with Phantom to bring in data enrichment for things that may not already have caused alerts, but be data that is available, right? An HTTP conversation, it is not in and of itself alertable, right? Actionable necessarily, but something related to it may have shown up. So instead of having to go and pull those PCAPs or using Splunk Stream to pull the PCAP metadata that you're using, that's very valuable. But what's the conversation? What's the HTTP payload? Those kinds of things I can now pull out of Corelight and use that to automate. And so I can reduce the number of tools in my environment in a SOC. I can reduce the amount of things that I have to think about in terms of automating, and number of tools that I have to work with and interact with, and get that data enrichment that I really want. And I think that by simplifying that, the number of sources, it also simplifies the amount of the ways that you need to pull the data out.
The Corelight the Zeek data and the Suricata data is also already SIM compliant, formatted correctly to be ingested into Splunk. And then for additional insight, obviously we have the Corelight app for Splunk for analysts to kind of use with the kind of predefined dashboards to kind of get them started for analyzing the Corelight Zeek data and Suricata data in the Splunk dashboard interface.
And I think that that's really important to note because a lot of the major vendors are doing this also, where they're common information compliant. And Splunk's common information or model, or CIM, CIM, it is a standard of field naming conventions for those folks who don't know what that is. And there's documentation on our website on it, and an app that builds data models around it. And so because Corelight is already using those field names, if somebody's using enterprise security, then all of this stuff that comes in Corelight that is relevant to any alerts and correlation searches or dashboards that they have already, it just comes in and it automatically works. So you install the Corelight apps, you bring in the Corelight data, and it shows up in enterprise security. That also means it's extremely easy to run queries against that in the Splunk data in Splunk using playbooks with Phantom, because they're all, it's known formats. And known field names. And one of the things I like that you do have these dashboards and things. Not all all apps do that. Instead, that just give you your field names to bring in, but you give somebody a starting point to understand how to think about analyzing your data. So it helps them in using the tool and using the data that's coming off of Corelight information more rapidly than if they had to figure out the visualizations and kind of understand that mental paradigm of understanding and knowing the richness and fidelity of the data that you provide. One of the things I see as additional insights you get with the integration of Splunk and Corelight, and especially using Splunk Phantom playbooks, using Corelight data, either triggering off of or interacting with the data and querying it, is that you have we go back to that discussion about automating your SOC, right, and understanding how to do data enrichment. You can get data enrichment kind of at the next level, really, because when you have these conversations, not just point in time information, right? You have point in time information is a firewall blocked this IP on this port in this protocol, right? Or this is the metadata for those protocols. What you don't get without something like Corelight is you don't get the HTTP conversation. So you can look at the data and bring it into your Phantom dashboard, where people are looking at your case management in ways that you cannot get without having the pre-built and analyzed conversations, your question and answer format that it provides. And one of the things that a customer can do is you can go download the freely available trial of Phantom, and it's a fully operational. So you can take the playbooks that you guys have published and take Corelight, Zeek and Suricata Corelight in the environment, install Phantom, and just drop the playbooks in and then tweak them for the environment. There may be some sort of tweaks they needed, and then immediately see what the difference would be. And I think that most people sitting in a SOC would find they could very, very quickly find incredible value out of that just by testing it themselves, or having one of us, us come in together and to do a trial for them.
At Corelight as well, we have the option to download the software sensor, as well as request other utilities such as the virtual sensor if you like to get that in a lab environment to do your testing and kind of build your end-to-end environment for further analysis testing, and just trying to figure out how everything works together and get your hands on the tools. Head to corelight.com